In late summer 1914, Jan Zając, a Polish peasant in the village of Tarnawka, faced an inescapable deadline. The summer wheat harvest was pressing. The community had to cut and store their crops immediately to ensure they had food for the winter. But the cycle of agrarian life was suddenly disrupted. Cossack cavalry scouts infiltrated the village ravines, secretly mapping the hills, roads, and highways into their tactical plans. Soon, a low, terrifying rumble rolled in from the southwest. It was the synchronized groan of Austro-Hungarian cannons advancing toward the village, literally shaking the soil beneath the peasants' feet. The disruption became a demographic crisis when the Russian government ordered the immediate mobilization of all reservists. Tarnawka was stripped of its young labor force at the exact moment they were needed in the fields. For the peasantry, the approaching war was a direct existential threat to the life-sustaining cycle of their food supply. The ensuing battle was triggered by the Austro-Hungarian First Army. Its commander, General Viktor Dankl, drove his forces rapidly northward, unknowingly overextending his lines and marching into a massive operational trap. The Russian Fourth Army launched a counteroffensive so large it spilled directly into Zając's backyard, turning his village into a primary combat zone. The agricultural fields were subjected to hurricane fire. Russian 76.2mm shrapnel rounds detonated directly over the stalks, instantly vaporizing the crops and churning the soil into a mix of mud and lead. The arrival of the armies overwrote the village's reality, transforming Tarnawka's source of life into a mechanized slaughterhouse. Dankl's drive north created a fatal vulnerability. A 50-mile gap opened between his army and the rest of the Austro-Hungarian front. To plug this vacuum, the German command rushed in the landwehr, older, under-equipped Silesian reserves, stretched thin across the massive opening. As they arrived, heavy rains saturated the region's clay-rich Loess soil. Under the weight of the armies, the ground transformed into a viscous, crippling mud. This mud acted as a friction multiplier. The adhesion of the wet clay to the soldiers' leather boots made every step an act of heavy lifting, causing systemic physical exhaustion and trench foot among the older reservists before the fighting even peaked. The landscape of Tarnawka had become an active participant in the battle, breaking the physical bodies of the men tasked with holding it. At night, the landwehr launched desperate bayonet assaults into the Russian lines. Amidst pitch-black blindness and the deafening roar of artillery, the sensory trauma became absolute. The older troops, their nerves spent by the physical and auditory pressure, eventually melted away into the darkness, abandoning the very trenches they had struggled to capture. Simultaneously, the Austro-Hungarian heavy artillery collapsed. Their massive guns became hopelessly swallowed by the thick clay mud, rendered immobile by the saturated earth. With the Russian advance closing in, the artillery crews were forced to spike and detonate their own immobilized guns to prevent them from being captured. The most advanced industrial war machines of the empires were paralyzed by a few inches of simple peasant soil. After 3 days of fighting, the Central Powers front collapsed. They executed a chaotic retreat, leaving Tarnawka a smoking ruin of cratered fields and burned-out cottages. A moment of solemnity. Jan Zając emerged into the silence to survey the physical devastation of his village. He found a gruesome sight in a plot of lupin. Nearly 100 bodies lay hidden in the high stalks, the earth around them splattered with blood. Zając wrote that the corpses littered the fields, lying packed together exactly like sheaves of wheat during harvest. The landscape was now so dense with shrapnel, grenades, and jagged iron that Zając found it impossible to strike a plow into the earth. The soil was so thick with lead and copper that city dwellers later arrived to mine the fields specifically for scrap metal. By the freezing winter of February 1915, the survivors were conscripted by Russian police to complete one final horrific labor under the iron-fisted authority of an Orthodox priest. Hacking into the frozen ground, the villagers dug massive trenches, some 30 cubits long, to bury the thousands of half-decayed bodies that had lain in the fields for 6 months. These immense mass graves became a physical footprint in the landscape, integrating the dead into the very geography where they had fallen. For the civilians of Tarnawka, the Great War was a catastrophic poisoning of their home, forcing them to reap a permanent harvest of the dead.